name is Karen Kier, and welcome to History Nebraska's Brown Bag History Learning Series. Talks are held monthly on the third Thursday in the Old Father Family Auditorium in the Nebraska History Museum in downtown Lincoln. Learn more about History Nebraska and our programs and services on history.nebraska.gov. If you're not a member of History Nebraska, I encourage you to join. If your support allows us to provide programs like the Brown Bag Series free to all Nebraskans. For a full list of membership benefits, visit our website. Special thanks to the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the financial support which allows us to tape and broadcast these programs across the state. We'd also like to thank LNK TV for the a service of City of Lincoln which provides these programs. If you would like to watch previous Brown Bag lectures, visit History Nebraska YouTube page at www.youtube.com, History Nebraska, see playlists. Today's topic is Solomon Butcher's History Scheme. Our speaker is LuAnn Wandsnider. LuAnn is a professor at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. She has conducted archaeological research around the globe and right here in Nebraska. LuAnn's students have studied History Nebraska's Solomon Butcher's photographs extensively, and she's also a member of the Nebraska State Preservation Board. Let me help welcome Dr. Wandsnider. If you have any questions, she prefers that you ask them at any time, and there should also be time at the end as well. Please let me help him. Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Sound is okay? Or do I need to adjust a microphone? Okay. Okay, better? All right. Thank you so much, and it's such a delight to be here. It's a delight to be in the room with so many Butcher scholars, and I hope that I can learn from you. I'll share, what little bits I've gleaned from my work over the next couple of minutes, but again, I'm delighted to be here. And I'm going to put my water down here. Okay, so here we are at the History Nebraska wonderful facility here, and I'm reminded of the words of George Orwell: "Those who control the past control the future, and those who control the present control the past." And in the times we're living in today, those worlds are very powerful, but I think they're also very powerful as we look at the kinds of things that Solomon Butcher was doing in Custer County in the 1880s and thereafter. And so what I'm going to kind of see if you buy my argument. I'm going to suggest that he was, through his work, producing a very powerful heritage narrative that really helped the residents of Custer County make it through some pretty tough times. And so I'm going to try and see if you buy this argument, but I'm going to try and make that case here. So my outline today, I just want to acknowledge some of the many sources that I'm drawing from. I'll do that first. I'll give you a little bit of snippet about Solomon Butcher as I've gleaned from my research so far. I'll tell you a little bit about the history scheme and gloss it as the Western Push and Energy History Scheme. I'm going to hit you with some social science. Okay, gird your loins, and we'll get you through that part. And then I'm going to talk about the power of this narrative and what it did for some of the residents of Custer County. And then finally, I'm going to suggest that maybe it's time to drill into that archive again and think about some new narratives that we might want to put forward here. Maybe we need to start thinking about a Nebraska nimble sort of narrative, and certainly we see that in Butcher's work. Okay, so I have benefited from multiple scholars that have worked on the Butcher archive. We have a rich scholarship that exists. I thank you to these various authors, especially John Carter, for his work and for his support. this work was very much inspired by the time I spent with him. We also have some reports from the trenches, and so we've got people like Solomon Butcher himself. He offers some stories about what it was like in the good old days. We've also got the accounts that have been put together by Gaston and Humphrey, published in 1919. And then we've got Purcell, one of the former editors of the Chief in Custer County. He drew together a bunch of stories, and those also provide lots of detailed information about what's going on in Custer County.
As far as I know, I haven't looked for it recently. The Pioneer History of Custer County is available fully online in a PDF format, so you can go through it and read it since it's out of print.
That's available online, and also you can find online the history of Custer County, Nebraska.
Okay,
And that's a
I've
lovely source as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And then we've also got some other work that we can pull from. So we've got some recent scholarship that the group over at Great Plains, the Center for Great Plains Studies, has produced on looking at homesteading on the plains. We've got the work Rachel Saylor, who is a art historian, and she has placed Butcher's work in context, comparing him with other landscape photographers of the day. And then there's a lovely, lovely dissertation by Melissa Wolf out of Ohio State, who I believe was a Custer County native. And so she brings a really close-in context to understanding what what Butcher's world is like in Custer County in the late 1800s. Finally, I've drawn also from lots of online resources. So Family Search provides censuses. Sometimes you can find them there. If not, you come over here and find them here at History Nebraska. The Library of Congress and History Nebraska have sponsored the wonderful Butcher Archive, which I've drawn lots of those photographs from that archive. It's a lovely, lovely site, has lots of cool information about the Butcher Archive. Visiting with the wonderful folks at Custer County Historical Society and Museum, lots of information there, incredibly well organized, lots of support from that institution. I'm thankful for some of our friends that have come over from Broken Bow today. Excuse me. And then I've also used I've drawn from the General Land Office records made available by the Bureau of Land Management. And you will see I've been able to take some of those records and do some interesting things with them. And then I'm also making use of some of the homestead documents that the partners, I believe the Homestead National Monument and the Center for Great Plains Studies have made it possible for us to access some of the homestead records. Those are available through Fold 3, which is you have to pay, darn it, you have to pay for it, but you can get to those records that way. And then, again, thank you to History Nebraska for all of the support they provided. They've allowed me to produce publications that will make use of the Butcher photographs, so I'm thankful to them for that. Okay, so who was Solomon Butcher? Well, we know we've got, again, various information about him, and again, pipe in if I'm forgetting some critical detail. I hope the audience will help me out here. But born in Virginia, he interns as a tin typist for a little bit after high school. He comes with his family to Custer County in 1880, discovers that he cannot, for the life of him, farm. And so he takes out a homestead. 2 weeks later, turns it back in. This is not the life for him. So he's got to figure out how to make a living. And he goes back to Illinois, and he goes to Minnesota, comes back eventually with a family at this point, and he establishes a studio in Walworth, which is up in the northeast portion of Custer County. Later, they shift over to West Union. And I guess he has some backing, he has some success there. But in 1886, he launches the Custer County History Scheme, and I'm going to give you a little bit more background on that in just a second. And he's busy making photographs, but also kind of working for his father, doing a little bit of farming. is able to get some land by just taking photographs. He's able to purchase some land. So he's kind of doing a little bit of gigging, what we call the gig economy today. He's kind of doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but also some photography. So we get to Custer County in 1880, and this is what it kind of looks like. So what you're looking at here, we've got the sand hills up in the northwest portion of the county. We've got the South Loop in the southwest portion of the county, the Middle Loop up in the upper northeast part of the county, Muddy Creek, Dry Creek, all kind of transecting the county. Those little green squares are parcels, 160-acre parcels that would have been transferred from the public domain by this point in time. And at least these are the ones that show up in the BLM records. There are likely others that I just haven't tracked down yet that are also transferred out of the public domain. And, you know, I guess we should also note that this is the Gilded Age, right? So we've got the railroads are coming in. There's big money to be made if you can figure out how to get your hand in the pie there. And this is kind of like, you know, those of us that enjoyed Downton Abbey, we can think of Downton Abbey on the prairie here. There's just so much transformation that's happening at this point. Incredible technological transformation, incredible social transformation, new ways of thinking about the land. All of that's happening and unfolding here in Custer County, and of course it's happening elsewhere, but we're going to focus on Custer County today. Okay, and when we look at, and this is I've taken from the census records for Custer County in 1880, and so what you're looking at here are pie charts that are telling us that people have stock, and if the circle is big, that means they have a lot of stock. If the circle is small, not so much. And it's also saying that if you've got mostly black pies, that you're running cattle. If you've got a white pie there, like Mr. Goodyear, you've got mostly sheep. If you've got yellow, it's poultry, red, horses, and then the blue is the swine. So you can see that on the South Loop, we've got lots of almost specialized stock production that's happening there. So lots of big cattle operations as well as big sheep operations. Up on the Middle Loop, there's also a lot of stock raising that's going on there. And those are big valleys. They can support that kind of effort. And we know from accounts that come to us in Butcher's book, as well as Gaston and Humphrey, the cattle and stock operators, they're kind of claiming a headquarters along those drainages, and then they're ranging with their beasts out across the countryside. So at that time, you know, you are pasturing your animals on the public domain. Okay, and then you also see in those smaller valleys, smaller operations, smaller numbers of stock, and also more mixed. So there's mixed kinds of operations, although up near where Broken Bow becomes established, more horse kind of dominated operations. I've got some stock values there that show up in the agricultural schedule records. So the big circles are maybe $12,000. So in today's money, that's maybe $500,000. And I don't really know. Those of you from Custer County can tell me, is $500,000 in stock? That probably is still on the small end of things, I would guess. I don't know. But we've got, we've got people doing major stock kinds of things. But importantly, what happens in 1881, or over the winter of 1880, 1881, there's a hard winter that hits these stock really hard. It's kind of like the winter we had last year. It seems to me that it starts early, ends late, lots of snow and ice on the ground. The cattle, the sheep can't get to the forage. So we have losses of maybe 65% of the cattle. In the case of cattle, for sheep, we're talking about 85%. So incredible losses to those stock operations, and that kind of it kind of sets the stage for a major transformation that happens in Custer County. That's when the farmers are able to come in, and where previously there was some pushback from the stockmen, now the farmers have maybe less pushback, and in fact, we see the actual transfer of the county, I guess the county legal architecture. It transfers from people like Stockman, like the Youngs, to more civil organizations in Broken Bow. So a major transformation that occurs then. Here's what it looks like in about 1886. And so we can see that there's been a whole lot more parcels that have transferred out of the public domain, and people are now farming on them as well as running stock probably. And we can see also we've got these little towns that have sprung up like mushrooms overnight. That's a recurrent phrase that shows up in those documents from the 1880s and 1890s. And so Butcher is there at this point. He has seen the stock be decimated. He has seen that now we've got all these new farmers coming in, and he has this brainstorm. He says, I've got it. I can document the passing of this frontier in Custer County. It's a way that maybe I can actually make a living for my family. I can memorialize this passing frontier, and I can produce an album, and that might be useful. And perhaps the model that's in his head that inspires him further are these kinds of albums which are the kinds of albums that were at this time circulating. That is to say, that you put together these photographs it's more than a coffee table kind of album. It's something that has a lot of kind of significance and importance to those families. And the art historians that have worked through this material are suggesting that this is the kind of thing that that Solomon Butcher was going for. Okay, and some of the evidence for this comes from these wonderful photographs of the photographic wagon here, the picture wagon. So here's his brother Abe on the Solomon Butcher picture wagon, and what it says on the side here, it says, so this is what the image looks like. Then you blow it up, and you're able to read the side of the wagon, and which says, "By the lightning process, for T.J. and S.D. Butcher's picture album of Custer County." So that's, again, suggests that the ultimate goal here is to put together one of these albums that hopefully our new middle class can begin to enjoy. Okay, some more about this history scheme. So he is making use of recently perfected camera technology. You're making use of glass plates to make negatives. You can get these really high-quality photographs. Unlike tintypes, which are a one-off, you make one tintype and then that's it. That's the original, and that's you can't make copies of it. But what you could do with this newfangled photographic technology is make a negative and then make multiple prints. And what he would do is go out to these farmsteads, make some photographs, and then he'd go into his wagon and make the prints. And so, he's got Amazon beat in the 1880s in terms of being able to deliver a product immediately. And sometimes what he would do is take those negatives back to the laboratory, back to his studio, and make some higher quality prints at that location, and then a couple weeks later come back out and deliver them. So again, he's really got Amazon beat at this time. Okay, the other thing I would like to say here, Roger Welsh has compared Butcher's history scheme to somebody taking on themselves the idea of photographing chrome on cars or something like that, that it was this pedestrian sort of phenomenon that he's photographing. But I see it a little bit differently. I think it's more similar to, let's say, if a drone pilot today were to show up at your farm or your ranch or your homestead and say, hey, $150, get all your stuff out. I'm going to fly over your land here, and I'm going to take some great pictures for you. You'll have them immediately. And then maybe, I think there's another part of this, though, as well. I think, so he's having a conversation with people on their land. He's situating them in their land and capturing them there. But then he's saying, and there's going to be something larger that comes out of this. And so the drone pilot might say, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, you know, transfer this to cloth, and then we're going to have a quilting bee, and we're going to make a giant quilt with all of your, you know, images of your land, and we're going to display that somewhere. And so I think there's a community aspect to what he's doing, and there's a high-tech, you know, cutting-edge aspect to what he's doing. And I think that makes it, in part, even more powerful. Okay, so the archives are maintained here at History Nebraska. They're large, and I'm looking for, I don't know if you can help me, Karen, are these the largest such archives that exist of this sort? Do we know? In terms of, I mean, we've got thousands of plates, but I don't know if other photographers, landscape photographers who are operating at this time are as prolific or as productive as him. He's one of the most prolific.
He's one of the largest, but I think that there are other larger ones.
Okay.
Well, another thing too is glass is more expensive, so it's like Huffman up in Montana. He cleaned his plates and reused them, so you don't have the negatives to save. And photographers in larger towns and that often sold those plates cheap, and they ended up as greenhouses.
Well, and we lost some of Butcher's plates in a fire too, so we don't have his full set either.
Right. Okay. So we're dealing with archives that, you know, they're tremendous. They're large.
It is a very large collection.
It's a
They were
large
smart
collection.
enough to save the negatives.
Yes.
It's like all the negatives you threw away back when we took film that way. You should have saved them.
We should have saved them, but we didn't. Yeah. So we've got you know, a large archive of these plates, and they're dense. So that here, what I've got is something that I encourage you to go to the History Nebraska website and look at the Butcher collection there. They've got a series of these examples of how cool and how, and I'm using the term dense because that's my old school way of thinking about photographs. I mean, they're so dense that you can go into the doorway there and change the lighting a little bit and blow that up and see what's inside the doorway there. So again, the quality of, even though Butcher himself was not a great photographer, the kind of technology he was using was such that you could do really interesting things with his negatives. And then, as I note here, unfortunately, as his history scheme, I think as he was kind of revving up again to complete it, he suffered a major loss. All of the notes that he had been collecting on his subjects over the past 20-some years were lost in a chimney fire on his property. Fortunately, the glass plates were not affected, and so we at least have the plates. And then what he attempted to do, he tried a number of different means to kind of reconnect with his subjects and get them to let him know that indeed they were the subject. He did have an index number on the plates, and so he was able to reconstruct some of that information. I don't have a sense of how accurate that information is. Okay, so we've got, all right. All right, so what do we have for his history scheme? What does it look like? Well, we've got the things that are in progress, and we've got all of these photographs that he made all across Custer County, and then later on he also went into Buffalo County and Cherry County and other counties and tried to capture the magic again. We have the picture album, which it was really not realized in the fashion that I think it was originally conceived. We have his pioneer history of Custer County, which is a series of stories and some of his photographs. And this is something that represents a work that I think was kind of inspired by, this is what I can do given what I've got. Let's make do with what I've got available to me. So again, this is what the products that we have from the history scheme. Okay, so where did he go? What did he do? Well, okay, I'm hearing that maybe some of his assignations of names to these plates are maybe a little suspect, but what you're able to do is at least take the name, and sometimes there'll be a place associated with it, and you can link that to these general land office records. And so that's what I've attempted to do here. What you see here is what Custer County looked like in 1886 in green, and then the little fuchsia dots that you can't really see all that well, but hopefully you can see that they're fuchsia, and there's a couple of them. There's especially a bunch up around West Union where his main haunts would have been. And then there's a couple others further down south near El Canto. And so again, these locations might be suspect, but I think there are some things that we can do to kind of assess that and maybe try and deal with that situation. We get to what Custer County looks like in 1888. And so again, we've got lots of land that is transferred out of the public domain. And he talks about how he's going out and he's visiting with farmers at various places all throughout Custer County. We have lots of shots of individuals in front of their homes. We also have lots of landscape shots and other kinds of shots that I'll share with you in just a second here. Here's what Custer County looks like in 1892. So lots of land has been transferred out of the public domain by this point. And we've got, fuchsia dots kind of all over the place. Some out near Milldale, some out near Arnold, some near Callaway, various places where he has now visited and imaged people. Okay, so what does this unfolding history scheme do for people? What does it convey? Well, Butcher himself talks about it as kind of like another kind of Western push and energy. That's something that he sees in the community at large, that there's just this vibe to the community, that there's entrepreneurship happening and innovation, and people are trying new things. And if you look at the photographs, at least, perhaps it was John Carter that went through these, it's like every fourth woman in these photographs is pregnant. So there's lots of productivity happening on this landscape.
That was unusual in the time the photograph of pregnant woman, too.
I did not know that, so
Yes,
appreciate that.
He's probably got the largest collection of pregnant women ever in the 19th
Wow,
century.
great. So some other things that, he's, again, got these folks situated in their landscape. They're placed in front of houses that they made with their own hands. They're building, the bricks are derived from the earth themselves. We've got new technologies that are visible here in terms of the mill, the windmill, and also, we've got fencing with barbed wire and things like that. That had been around for 10, 20 years, but here it's being used to pen in animals as opposed to allow them to free range on the public domain. We've got, again, a productive landscape. Of course, there's some unspoken things that we can see here as well. I mean, it was by the Homestead Act that people were situated on these 160-acre parcels. So basically, we've got sort of a portrait of the heavy hand of the federal government here, sort of saying, this is how you will settle this landscape. And by dint of that, we also, I suppose, if we lift up that veil a little bit, we can say, gee, Native Americans are not here. They had been removed to reservations by this point in time. Bison, not here. We know that some of the last elk were hunted out of this area maybe about 1883, 84. So this is a transforming landscape that he is documenting. And I think, and what Melissa Wolf would also emphasize is that what he is doing with his project is he is offering history on an industrial scale. And so that's another aspect of that Western push and drive and energy and that whole innovation vibe that he is part of. And the fact that he's able to provide these photographs almost instantaneously is just another indication of that. So what is he photographing? Well, he's photographing, you name it, just about. So he's got shots of various kinds of infrastructure. We've got train shots, we've got people grading the railroad lines, we've got construction of an irrigation canal happening here. Telephone lines show up in some of his photographs. We've got various kinds of institutions that he's capturing. So we've got schools, we've got newspaper, we've got churches, the ladies' auxiliaries of various organizations are photographed. The very first county courthouse is photographed. So he's capturing the development of this new county. And he's also helping remember some of the events that are important to the residents of the county. And so some of the confrontations that existed between the settlers and the stockmen, and there are a number of them documented in his writings as well. He recreates these vignettes. He's got here Ephraim Swain Finch recreating what it was like when the locusts descended on his crops in 1875 and 1876, how he dealt with that situation. And so he's placed his actors on the landscape, and then what he does is go in and doctor the negative to sort of make, to bring the locusts alive. So he didn't have, this is before, green screens and all that sort of stuff.
The wire cutters on the other one is awesome, too.
It's a pair of sticks.
It was a felony to have a wire cutter on the range at that time. That was a federal law.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't, he was smart enough not to take pictures and then put it on Facebook of doing crimes.
And I would say also that, there's lots of innovation happening with how people are raising different kinds of stock. We've got pedigreed livestock that have been showing up on this landscape probably after the major die-off event of the earlier stock. We've got Virgil Allen's going over to California and bringing back alfalfa, so setting up, again, introducing new kinds of crops, new kinds of farming technologies, new ways of plowing, new ways of harvesting. All of those are being captured by Butcher in his photographs. Okay, so now I'm going to hit you with some social science. Are you ready? Okay. So, one of the things we know is that this time period saw lots of challenges. And, certainly early on, there are various kinds of challenges. So, in the homesteading records, we could see where people are reporting that they didn't get a crop in 1883 because they were hailed out. So we can see that in those homesteading records. When we get to the 1890s, we get lots of reports of people being hit hard by droughts. And then we also have incredible economic challenges as well. I mean, Custer County, like everywhere else in North America, is part of a large world system. And so whatever's going on in Egypt, whatever's going on in India is affecting the price of wheat and corn and pigs and whatever in Custer County. And so as a consequence and of course we've got various kinds of, bad actors manipulating stock markets and things like that happening. So we've got really some challenging situations that the residents of Custer County are facing. All right, so again, some more social science here. So we have people who research how to help people get out of poverty in Africa or in Asia. And they look at the kinds of assets that people have. They help them assess what those assets might be. For example, how young are you, or how old are you, or what kinds of knowledge do you have? Are you situated near the river or not? Are you situated near the railroad, the physical, that would be a physical asset? Did you come over here with all of your brothers and sisters and their spouses, and now you've got this little community that you can kind of share labor with? Or do you have wealth that allows you to purchase land when others are leaving? So these are various kinds of assets that we could inventory, and we could sort of say, well, depending on what your portfolio of assets looks like, you may be more or less resilient. And so here's again where the social science comes in, because social scientists have said, well, wait a minute. That's assuming that all things are equal, and we know that things are not always equal for everybody. Sometimes you're being asked to pull up your bootstraps, and by the way, you've been asked to give your bootstrap away, so now, or there are laws or prescriptions out there that say thou shalt not have bootstraps, and so how are you supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps? So we understand that there are these human and social factors that intervene into how people are able to amass or deploy their various assets. And so the other addition I want to make to this, though, is that it may be that the heritage narrative that we have in the back of our mind that kind of helps us through these bad times might also be a kind of asset, or it might allow us to attenuate or rev up some of those assets. That is to say, if we buy in to Butcher's Western push and energy narrative, maybe we can make it through those bad times. Maybe if we believe that we've seen ourselves in other difficult situations and we know our family survived those situations, maybe we can make it ourselves through those bad times. So again, I'm pulling on these ideas of resilience, and these are ideas that are being explored by ecologists and engineers and psychologists and early childhood development. It's a concept that it transcends multiple disciplines here. Here I'm kind of pulling from the ecological and the development literature, and I'm going to focus on persistence, and I'm going to ask, do families participating in Butcher's history scheme maybe better persist through these challenges of the 1890s than do people that, for whatever reason, maybe they just don't have the resources to buy his photographs, maybe they think he's, a crazy coot and they're not going to buy into it. There might be a lot of reasons why they're not participating. And so, but maybe, how do those folks persist? That's the kind of question I want to ask here. And I also want to recognize that we're dealing with a really kind of potent artifact. So I'm an archaeologist. We deal with artifacts. We know, I mean, probably many of you of my vintage, as you pick up a hairbrush or you look at a spoon and you think of who gave it to you, I can barely make it through my day anymore because I've got all those memories attached to every material item that I'm interacting with. And we know that photographs have that kind of power, and probably it's magnified. And so the idea here that, it's tangible, it's something that you can share, it's something that Butcher came and had a conversation with you and your family and positioned you just so, and brought out your dogs and brought out your horses, and it was a special day, and the sun was in your face and you had to stand still for a certain length of time, and so all of this was going on, and so it charges that artifact. It makes it that much more potent. And it's something as well that he's coming and having this conversation with you and situating you in this landscape. You are part of something bigger than yourself. You're part of this incredible transformation of the landscape. And he is helping you see that. He's reinforcing that for you. And so I think these photographs are incredibly potent. And we know that, people purchased them, they had them. They were able to, we were able to trace them to some extent. We've got them in the various archives, thankfully. And here are some examples of some of the families that are imaged here. So here, again, Butcher has placed these family members in front of their many kind of material accomplishments. In this case, Dan Haskell looks to be somebody that maybe had a little bit of wealth. He comes into the county early on. He's running sheep and cattle early on. He doesn't get censused in 1880, but he shows up in 1885. He shows up in the homestead records, and that allows us to appreciate what he's doing. And so, again, we get these little snippets of information on people. It's not, again, like Amazon today that has 5,000 pieces of information on all of us, but we get these little snippets of information about these individuals. And we can kind of see like how they weathered various challenges. Another example, the Henry Rowe family. Henry Rowe and his families are over in the northeast part of the county. He's got he's got his father and another brother and a cousin that are along in that area. It looks like maybe he had a second wife, and they also had children. So again, we can kind of track these individuals through space and time, and get a sense of what's going on with their lives. And of course, so it's kind of it's almost a microhistory, but it's maybe not quite as detailed as we would ask to see if we were doing true microhistory. Okay, so here's, again, me being a social scientist. I asked the question, can we look at people who we think were subjects of butcher? And again, there's a little bit of a issue there with how accurate that presumption can be. And can we match those maybe with people who we don't think were subjects of butcher? They don't show up in the butcher archive. And can we ask the question, how did these different little samples fare through time? How did they endure the challenges of the 1890s? And so that's the question I'm posing here. And so the yellow are the butcher farm views as they show up in the archives. The fuchsia here are my control farmsteads. I tried to find people that came onto the land about the same time, had about the same profile, about the same age, that kind of thing. And then I tracked them through various documents. So I could track them using the General Land Office records. I could track them using the homestead patent records, whether or not they show up in butcher's files, whether or not they appear in the Nebraska Business Directory. And then in the census records, we've got records from the 1880s, 1885. There was a major fire that destroyed all the records in Washington from the 1890 census, so we don't have those, but sometimes if these individuals were Union veterans, we might have their records. And then we can see them in the 1900 census. Okay, so now I'm going to hit you again with, you're going to have to look at nasty things called graphs and stuff like that, and so I'm going to try and step you through it. So what we have here is we've got 31 people, 31, let's say, farmers and their families, stockmen and their families that are here, and they show up in before the 1880 census, or they're censused in 1880. And of those 31 people, 11 of them are what I call a control. That is to say, they apparently are not in butcher's archives. But another 20 of them do appear to be in butcher's archive. Okay, so he took photographs of them. They had interactions. They maybe participated willingly or not in his history scheme. And so what I can see here is that of the 20 people that show up in the census that have butcher photographing them, of those 20 people, 80% of them continue to be in Custer County by the time the 1900 census occurs. So they are persisting, okay? There's another 20% that are not persisting. They are disappearing. I ruled out people that died, so they haven't died, but they've disappeared. On the other hand, when we look at our control sample, we look at the people that butcher did not image. Of those 11 people, 64% continue in Custer County and show up in the 1900 census. And then another, what would that be, 26%, 36% do not. And we're dealing with small numbers here, but there's a little bit of a pattern, okay? Are you with me? Do you understand?
So if you look back when we were talking about resilience, and there are 5 or 6 different factors of resilience, and one of those is human, and so why would you take out the people who have passed away? Because maybe they, in terms of defining persistence, maybe they passed away because of the drought and the starvation, or maybe they passed away because of disease. It might not have been old age. So I'm curious why you made that decision to take those out of that equation.
Okay, so the question is, why do I take the people who died out of the sample that I'm looking at, and as I look to see who persisted and who didn't? And the reason why I did that is because I couldn't always confirm what happened to the people that disappeared. Sometimes I could see that they died, but sometimes I couldn't. And so for that reason, I was concerned that maybe I had a contaminated sample. So I wanted to be kind of consistent. But thank you for that question. Okay. So we look at, now we're looking at between 1881 and 1885. So again, people are being censused in 1885. We can see that they weren't there in 1880. We can see that they showed up sometime between 1881 and 1885. This is when Butcher and his family showed up at this time. There was a major influx of people at this time, but a much larger influx of people that happened after the railroad comes in 1886. And so again, I've got 33 families that show up at this time. 17 of them are those control people. They are not showing up in the Butcher archive. 16 of them are showing up in the Butcher archive. They were photographed, we think, by Butcher. So now I ask the question, of those people, who persisted in Custer County through the 1900 census? And so here we see that when we look at the Butcher sample, 75%, that would be 12 of 16 people that showed up early on. They are the ones, they had conversations with Butcher, they were imaged by Butcher, they continue on, and they are showing up in the 1900 census. On the other hand, only 24% of 17 families that were there, we know they were there between 1881 and 1885. They should have had a good shot at things because they're there for, it's kind of in the scheme of things, it's not a bad time to be in Custer County. But only 24% of those make it through to the census in 1900. They are not persisting, okay? Questions? And then finally, we've got some late arrivals that we can take a look at. And here we're kind of challenged by the fact that we lost those 1890 census records. And so it's kind of hard to know what's going on. But we have, at least we can see who's showing up in the business directory. And again, if that's a great source, if it's a comprehensive source, it's probably the people that are being successful that are showing up there. So this is kind of a wonky sample, but it's the best that we've got. And so what we can see there is that of our 6 people who were not subjects of Butcher, who were not imaged by Butcher, of those 6, 3 of them persist, 3 of them do not persist. 3 of them stay in Custer County, 3 of them do not. And we see the same thing when we look at the 14 people who were participating with Butcher in his history scheme. 7 of them stay and thrive in Custer County, 7 of them don't. Okay, so we've got a kind of a mixed message here, perhaps. How I interpret this is I will suggest that those early settlers who participated in the history scheme, in Butcher's history scheme, I think it helped them. I mean, that's going a little far, right? But I think there's something going on there that the people that bought into that scheme, maybe they were already of the same mind as Butcher. They already said, yeah, we're here in Custer County, times are tough, but we're tougher, and we're going to persevere. I mean, it may well be that the people that shared that mindset with Butcher are the ones that said, yeah, I'm going to buy some of those photographs. Yeah, we're going to get this thing going. And the people that couldn't afford to, or that were not as smitten by the idea, for whatever reasons, they said, times are tough, I'm bailing. I'm out of Custer County. And so, again, I'm suggesting that this history narrative, this narrative of Western push and energy, I'm suggesting that it might be a really powerful narrative that might help people make it through some tough times. If they have those images of their folks, of their family that made it through tough times as well, that persevered, maybe that's just enough to allow people to sort of figure out ways to make it through the tough times that Custer County was throwing at them. Now, again, we don't really know who is infecting whom here. We know that the newspapers, even early on, the very earliest newspapers are kind of promoting this idea of energy and innovation and entrepreneurship. And so it may well be that it's just something in the air, and what Butcher is doing is echoing it and reinforcing it, so that there's that possibility. But, he tells us that he talked to anybody he could. He was bending everybody's ear about his history project. And so you got to have some, you have a sense that maybe that was a very powerful kind of thing. Okay, when we look at Custer County today, it seems to me we've seen that same Western push and energy kind of narrative promoted. Here's the Custer County Economic Development Corporation website talking about work ethic and fiscal responsibility and pioneer spirit. I think it has that elements of the Butcher kind of message. But now I'm going to suggest something a little different. Or I'm going to suggest that given what's coming at us, like the 120 freight train coming into Broken Bow in 1886, we've got climate change staring at us in the face. And, maybe that's just more of the same of what the folks in Custer County have been experiencing over the past 120, 30, 40 years. But maybe it's on steroids now. Maybe we need to, think about that. And so my question is, what sort of narrative do we want to maybe create for ourselves to help us get through this time that we're looking at here? And, I see in the work of Mike Farrell and Mike Foster some of the images that they're capturing to help us understand how the landscape is changing and how, we should be paying attention to those changes. I see that as kind of continuing Butcher's tradition of bringing that landscape to us and bringing us to the landscape and helping us appreciate that there's things happening out there. We don't know where the next bomb cyclone is going to hit. We don't know where those next floods are going to hit. We don't know when the Shadron fires are going to now show up elsewhere. And we know that, again, the Custer County folks, they dealt with prairie fires. They dealt with blizzards. They dealt with all kinds of things. And they were nimble, and they were resourceful, and they had a narrative that promoted that kind of ability. And so I'm just wondering, do we need to be adapting our narrative to anticipate and bring us through the next couple years of challenges? And so I return to the beginning here, and I say, here we are at History Nebraska. We are at, this is the church of potent artifacts, right? And so, we've got, people with incredible talents and energy here in this room that can help us recruit the right artifacts, put together those narratives that are going to push us through the next couple decades. And, thank goodness. Thank goodness for History Nebraska, and thank goodness for Butcher giving us a model that we can maybe think about to get us through the next couple decades. So I'm going to stop there, see if there are some questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have one. When you look at rural counties in Nebraska, today, Custer County, how do they fare in terms of wealth, economic development? Do you have an idea?
Okay, so the question is how, when we compare Custer County with other rural counties in Nebraska today, how do they fare? How do they compare? And I have to say I'm somewhat ignorant. I only know what I read in the newspaper. And so it seems like they're doing a little bit better, I would say. They seem to be, in my impression, and please chime in, they seem to be very organized and very kind of, forward-looking and kind of thinking about what it is we need to stay on top of things. But that's my impression. I don't know if you would, Lance, would you like to comment on that?
We've been lucky in Custer County through the big economic downturn, but that was probably the largest growth in Custer County for 50, 60 years. So if you take a look at western Broken Bow, the western edge of Broken Bow, that's all new development. That's a lot of new jobs for our county. So a new convention center, a new bank, a new federal land office building, a new chiropractic clinic. All of that, it was done during probably some of the worst economic times in the whole United States. So we've been very fortunate, and that's a lot of local leaders saying we need to invest in our community. And so we've been very fortunate in Custer County. And that trickles down to the other towns in the county, because some of us are, my small town is a bedroom community now, but all of those jobs, people migrate to Bow for those jobs. So we've been really, I would say, fortunate, extremely fortunate. I wish our population has not grown exponentially, but for the people we have there, it's a pretty good life. So we've been lucky. I don't know if I can draw that conclusion with Solomon Butcher that pushes that way.
Yes, sir.
What was the cost to the settler for one of the photographs?
I have to say I do not know that. I was going to check that.
50 cents to $1.
Okay.
50 cents to $1 is the cost of.
Depending upon the size of it, because it was on the back. And one person, she didn't admit, well, we talked about Swain Finch, had a picture of him. Swain Finch was huge for Solomon Butcher because he backed Solomon Butcher. He said, if you buy this history book of Custer County, I personally will guarantee that you get the book. So Swain Finch, that guy swinging that crate, this old man swinging that crate, is really important to Solomon. Solomon Butcher was lucky to find that man, because I'm not so sure that the Pioneer History of Custer County would have ever been published without that guarantee, because you said there was an economic downturn then. 50 cents doesn't sound like anything now, but 50 cents, $1 was a day's wage, and that book originally sold for $1.50. That was its original price. So that was a consideration at that time.
And the book sold out in 6 months, so they had to go to a
They
new.
had to reprint it, which, my humble opinion, was the only time Solomon Butcher really ever saw economic prosperity in his life.
Right.
Most of his times.
Yeah.
He was not a very successful person otherwise.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
What did you do between 92 and 96? Because you have two sets of dates up there, so.
Yeah.
Was he gone? Did he get depressed? What happened?
So what did Solomon Butcher do between 1892 and 1898? We have a gap in the kinds of the photographic archive that we have for him. And from reading, his accounts, it sounds like he's there, but he's farming, and he's having a hard go of it. Karen.
He was a school teacher. He served some offices. He did some political work. He did a little farming. He still took photos locally, portraiture kind of work. Those didn't survive. They were not in the silo where the book photos were, or his album photos were. Those did not survive the fire. So he was doing a lot of different things. And if you want to go up to the exhibit, you can learn more about that.
Another question then.
Yes, sir.
In your sample of the people who persevered and those who didn't persevere, did you check to see who actually proved up and gained their homesteads, and which of those quit before they were able to do that?
So I did not look to see. Okay, let me rephrase the question. So the question is, did I look to see who of the people in either of my samples kind of successfully proved up their homesteads? And I would say I did not necessarily look at that. I mean, I know that if they're in my records for homestead documents, that means they proved up. So to find the people that did not prove up, I have to go to another set of records that I have not yet opened. And so that would be on the horizon.
All right, I want to thank everybody for coming today. We can probably answer some more questions, but thank you very much. Big round of applause.